The first time I tasted arsenic, I was 8 years old. I didn't know it was arsenic, of course. I knew it was grandmother's special tea, a bitter herbal infusion that Eugenia brewed every afternoon at precisely 4 o'clock, served in porcelain cups that had belonged to her own grandmother. She called it the tonic of our family. She said it had kept her young, kept her sharp, kept her alive while others withered. "Drink it all, Helena," she would say, her eyes bright and bird-like, watching me over the rim of her own cup. "It's what makes us strong. What makes us family." I drank it. I was 8, and my father had just died, a heart attack, they said, though I would later wonder, and my mother was already disappearing into a bottle that would finish the job within 6 years. Eugenia was all I had. The grand house with the ivy-covered walls, the antique furniture that smelled of beeswax and secrets, the kitchen where she presided over bubbling pots like a priestess at an altar. I trusted her. Children trust grandmothers. They trust the hands that bandage knees and bake cookies and brew special teas that taste like medicine because they are meant to heal. But this medicine was not meant to heal. It was meant to weaken, to sicken, to prepare me for a death that would look natural, tragic, inevitable. I was 24 when I learned the truth. 16 years of drinking her poison, of growing pale and tired and sensitive, of hearing doctors tell me that my symptoms were stress, anxiety, the inheritance of my mother's nervous constitution. 16 years of being the sickly granddaughter, the fragile heiress, the girl who would never live to see her fortune. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories. If you're here, maybe you know what it means to be fed poison by the hands that should have fed you love. Maybe you know the particular horror of discovering that the person who tucked you in at night was measuring your life in teaspoons. If this is your first time, hit that subscribe button. We tell stories here about women who learn the chemistry of their own survival, who turn the potions that were meant to kill them into proofs that set them free. Here's my story. Here's my story. My father died when I was 8. I don't remember him well. A tall man with a laugh that echoed in hallways. A man who smelled of pipe tobacco and the lemon polish he used on his law books. He was a corporate attorney, the kind who made fortunes for other people and accumulated modest wealth for himself. The kind who made a will that left everything to his only daughter, to be held in trust until she turned 25. I didn't know about the will. I didn't know about the trust. I knew only that my father was gone, that my mother was drinking herself into a stupor in her bedroom, and that my grandmother Eugenia had moved into the house to take care of us. My mother died when I was 14. Liver failure, accelerated by grief, or so the doctors said. I found her in her bedroom, surrounded by bottles that Eugenia had brought her, to help her sleep, my grandmother said, her face a mask of sorrow that didn't quite reach her eyes. I didn't know then that Eugenia had been replacing her vodka with higher-proof alternatives, that she had been encouraging the drinking, that my mother's death was not an accident but a timeline. I was alone then. Alone with Eugenia, in the house with the ivy-covered walls, drinking the special tea every afternoon at 4 o'clock. The symptoms started early. Fatigue that made me sleep through school. Headaches that felt like someone tightening a vice behind my eyes. Digestive problems that doctors attributed to nervous stomach. Stress, the trauma of losing both parents so young. I was pale, thin, prone to fainting. I learned to carry crackers in my pockets, to sit down when the room spun, to accept that I was simply not as robust as other girls my age. Eugenia was attentive. She took me to specialists, always the ones she chose, always the ones who confirmed her diagnosis of constitutional weakness. She prepared my meals, my medicines, my life. She homeschooled me when I was too tired for regular school, tutored me in history and literature and the proper way to pour tea. She told me I was special, delicate, precious. She told me that my fragility was what made me worthy of love. I believed her. I was 14, then 16, then 18. I had no one else to believe. My father's family was distant, scattered, uninterested in a sickly girl. My mother's family had disowned her for marrying beneath her, or so Eugenia said. I had no friends. Eugenia didn't approve of outside influences. I had no teachers. Eugenia said they overtaxed me. I had only her and the house and the tea that tasted like family and felt like dying. I went to college because Eugenia allowed it, a small, private university nearby, where she could monitor me, where she packed my lunches and my medicines, where she called 3 times a day to make sure I was taking care of myself. I studied chemistry because it was practical, because Eugenia approved of practical things, because I didn't know what else to do with a life that felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I was 22 when I met Dr. Sarah Chen. She was a toxicologist, guest lecturing in my advanced organic chemistry class, and she spoke about heavy metal poisoning with the passion of someone who had seen too many victims. Arsenic, she said, was the poisoner's favorite, tasteless in small doses, cumulative in its effects, mimicking so many natural illnesses that it was often missed. Chronic arsenic poisoning, she said, projecting images of symptoms on the screen, presents as fatigue, headache, gastrointestinal distress, peripheral neuropathy. Patients are often diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, anxiety, somatoform disorders. The poisoner is frequently a family member, someone with access, someone trusted, someone who benefits from the victim's decline. I sat in the lecture hall and I felt the world tilt. Fatigue, headache, gastrointestinal distress, peripheral neuropathy, the tingling in my hands and feet that Eugenia called growing pains even though I had stopped growing years ago. After class, I approached Dr. Chen. I told her I was writing a paper on historical poisoning cases. I asked her about detection methods, about hair analysis, about the half-life of arsenic in human tissue. She was generous with her knowledge. She told me about hair testing. Arsenic deposits in hair at a rate that reflects exposure over time, creating a timeline of poisoning. She told me about nail clippings, about blood tests, about the way chronic exposure could be proven even after the poison stopped. I went home that night and I looked at my hands. My pale, thin hands, with their brittle nails that Eugenia said was a sign of my delicate constitution. I looked at my hair, falling out in clumps that Eugenia attributed to stress. I looked at the teacup on my nightstand, the one she had left for me before bed, the one I was supposed to drink to sleep well. I didn't drink it. I poured it into a sample vial I had stolen from the chemistry lab, and then I lay awake all night, counting the cracks in my ceiling, wondering if I was crazy or if I was finally, for the first time, sane. The test results came back 3 weeks later. I had paid for them with money I had saved from a small allowance Eugenia gave me for incidentals, money I was supposed to spend on books and toiletries, money I had hoarded like a squirrel preparing for winter. I sent hair samples, nail clippings, and the tea from my nightstand to a private lab in another state, using a false name and a post office box I had rented in a town 40 miles away. I told Eugenia I was doing a research project for Dr. Chen. She believed me, or she pretended to believe me, because she had spent 16 years teaching me that I was too weak to be deceptive. The results were unambiguous. My hair showed arsenic levels consistent with chronic exposure over at least 10 years. The pattern was consistent, higher levels in segments corresponding to winter months, when Eugenia increased my tonic to ward off colds. The tea contained arsenic trioxide, at concentrations that would cause cumulative poisoning without immediate death. I held the report in my hands, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not rage, not grief. Clarity. The clarity of a chemical equation finally balancing, of a reaction completing, of 16 years of mystery resolving into a single, elegant formula. Eugenia was poisoning me. She had been poisoning me since I was a child. And she was doing it because of the trust fund, the $12 million that would become mine at 25, that would pass to her if I died before then, that she had been systematically ensuring I would never live to claim. I sat with this knowledge for 3 days. I didn't confront her. I didn't stop drinking the tea. I poured it out when she wasn't looking, replaced it with water, maintained the fiction of my fragility. I needed time. I needed a plan. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with, so I investigated. Quietly, carefully, the way she had taught me to be, though she had meant obedience, not subterfuge. I accessed the trust documents through the law firm that managed them, using my status as the beneficiary. I found the will, the codicils, the provisions that made Eugenia my guardian, and in the event of my death before 25, the sole heir. I found the letter from the trust attorney, dated 6 months ago, that Eugenia had tried to suppress. She had petitioned for early release of the funds, citing my deteriorating health and her need to prepare for end-of-life care. The attorney had denied the petition but noted that should the beneficiary predecease her 25th birthday, the trust would transfer in its entirety to the guardian, Mrs. Eugenia Vance, as stipulated in the original trust instrument. She had tried to get the money early. When that failed, she had accelerated the poisoning. The tea had grown stronger in recent months. My symptoms had worsened. She was running out of time and she knew it. I also found something else. A box in the attic, behind old trunks and forgotten furniture, that contained her own records. Journals dating back to my father's death. Notes on my progress, my weight, my symptoms, my doctor visits. And most damning, recipes. Handwritten formulas for Helena's tonic with precise measurements of arsenic, lead, and thallium. Notes on adjustments, more lead when I was 13, to cloud the mind. Thallium added at 16, to accelerate decline. She had been experimenting on me, perfecting my death, treating my life like a chemistry project with a predetermined endpoint. I put the box back. I went to my room. I looked in the mirror at my pale, thin face, my brittle hair, my eyes that had learned to see what others missed. And I made a decision. If Eugenia wanted a chemist, I would become one. Not the fragile student she had allowed me to be, but the woman I might have become without her interference. I would use her own methods against her. I would brew her a tonic she couldn't resist. I spent the next year becoming indispensable. The dutiful granddaughter, drinking my water discaicetistia, expressing gratitude for her care, asking her advice on recipes and remedies. I told her I wanted to learn the family traditions, the herbal knowledge she had always hinted at but never fully shared. I told her I wanted to carry on her legacy. She was flattered, or greedy, or both. She began teaching me cautiously at first, then with increasing openness, the art of natural medicine. The herbs that healed, she said, the roots that strengthened, the minerals that clarified the mind. I listened. I took notes. I smiled and nodded and stored everything in the laboratory of my memory. And in my actual laboratory, the one I had access to as a graduate student in chemistry, I began to experiment. I studied neurotoxins, not the crude arsenic she fed me, but subtler compounds. Substances that caused confusion, memory loss, personality changes, symptoms that mimic dementia, Alzheimer's, the natural decline of age. I studied the alkaloids found in certain plants, the ones that were legal, that could be purchased at garden stores and health food shops, that would never show up on a standard toxicology screen. I created a formula. A rejuvenation tonic, I called it. When I described it to her, something I had read about in old texts, something that promised vitality, clarity, longevity. The elixir of youth hidden in forgotten pharmacopoeias. She was suspicious at first. Eugenia had spent a lifetime being suspicious. But I played to her vanity, her greed, her terror of aging. I told her that I had found the formula while researching my thesis, that it had been used by European nobility, that it was the secret behind their long lives and sharp minds. I made it for you, I said, presenting her with a small amber bottle. To thank you for everything, for taking care of me, for keeping me alive. She looked at the bottle, she looked at me. And she saw what she had trained me to be, the grateful, fragile granddaughter who owed her everything. How sweet, she said. She opened the bottle. She smelled it, herbal, slightly bitter, not unlike her own tonics. And you say it promotes longevity. Sharpness of mind, I said, youthful energy. I've been reading about the ingredients, they're all natural, all traditional, just like your special tea. She smiled. The smile of a woman who had successfully raised a victim to be her accomplice, who saw in my offering the final confirmation of her dominance. I'll try it tonight, she said. She did. And she continued, every night for 6 months. I prepared it fresh each week, varying the concentration slightly, monitoring her progress with the same attention she had given me. I watched her become sharper at first, the initial stimulant effect, the false clarity that made her believe it was working. Then I watched the confusion set in. The memory lapses. The moments of disorientation that she attributed to age catching up. I was patient. I had learned patience from 16 years of poisoning. I knew that the best toxins were slow, cumulative, invisible. I knew that the victim should never suspect until it was too late. She never suspected. She trusted me as she had trained me to trust her. She drank my tonic and praised my devotion and planned my death, unaware that her own was being prepared with the same care. My 25th birthday was in October. Eugenia planned a party, a gala, she called it, a celebration of my quarter century, and though she didn't say it, the expiration date of my usefulness. I knew her plan. I had found the final journal entry, the one she hadn't bothered to hide because she believed I was too weak to snoop. The cake she had written. A special recipe for Helena's last celebration. She will not see 26. I read it without emotion. I had spent a year preparing for this moment, and I was ready. The party was held at the house with the ivy-covered walls, transformed for the occasion with flowers and candles, and the kind of opulence that Eugenia used to remind people of her status. Guests arrived, distant relatives I barely knew, colleagues of my father's who had stayed in touch out of obligation, local dignitaries who owed Eugenia favors. I wore white. Not the white of innocence, but the white of a lab coat, of a clean slate, of a ghost who had finally learned to haunt her own life. Eugenia presided, radiant in her 80s, her mind still sharp enough to maintain the facade. She had been drinking my tonic for 6 months, and the effects were becoming noticeable, slight tremors in her hands, moments of confusion when she introduced guests, a tendency to call me by my mother's name. But she was still functional, still dangerous, still planning my death while she smiled and poured champagne. The cake was wheeled out at 9 o'clock. 3 tiers, white frosting, 25 candles flickering like warnings. Eugenia insisted on cutting it herself, on serving me the first slice, the birthday girl's privilege. She handed me the plate with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Eat, my dear, enjoy, you've earned it." I looked at the cake. I looked at her. And then I stood up, abandoning the plate on the table, and walked to the podium where Eugenia had arranged for speeches to be made. "Grandmother," I said, my voice carrying through the room, "you've always taught me the importance of family traditions, of recipes passed down through generations. I thought tonight I would share one with our guests." I pressed the remote in my pocket. The screen behind me lit up with images, the lab report from 3 years ago showing arsenic in my hair, the journal entries with her precise formulas for Helena's tonic, the trust documents, the petition for early release, the provisions that made her my heir. The room went silent. Eugenia's face went pale, then red, then settled into a mask of outrage. "Helena, what is this? You're confused, your illness." "I'm not confused," I said. "I'm not ill, at least not anymore. I stopped drinking your tea 2 years ago, grandmother, and I started studying chemistry. Real chemistry, not the folk wisdom you used to hide murder." I clicked to the next slide. The recipe for her special cake, photographed from her journal. The annotations: increased arsenic for final dose. Will appear as natural decline. Trust transfers upon confirmed death. "I was supposed to die tonight," I said, "in my sleep after my birthday party. You would have been the grieving grandmother, the devoted caretaker who tried so hard, and you would have inherited $12 million. I walked to her. I reached into my bag and pulled out the amber bottle, my tonic, my gift, her poison. "But I've been giving you something too, grandmother, a rejuvenation tonic. All natural, all traditional, just like yours." Her eyes widened. She looked at the bottle, then at me, and for the first time I saw fear. Real fear, not the performance she had maintained for decades. What have you done?" "Given you clarity," I said. "You wanted to live forever, didn't you? To be sharp and young and in control. I've given you that. The clarity to understand what's happening to you. The youth of mind that comes from certain alkaloids. And the control," I smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "The control to know that you're losing it moment by moment and that there's nothing you can do." She staggered. She reached for a chair, missed, caught herself on the table. The guests were frozen, watching, understanding dawning slowly across faces that had been trained to see her as a saint. "You're confused, grandmother," I said. "Aren't you? You've been confused for months. Calling me by my mother's name. Forgetting names. Losing your place in conversations. The doctors will call it dementia. Rapid onset Alzheimer's. Tragic but not uncommon at your age." I leaned close enough to smell the peppermint and arsenic on her breath. "But we know better, don't we? We know it's just chemistry, just medicine, just the family tradition you taught me so well." She collapsed into the chair. Her hands were shaking violently now, the tremors that had been subtle becoming pronounced. She opened her mouth to speak, to deny, to command, but the words wouldn't come. The alkaloids were doing their work, severing the connections between thought and speech, between intention and action. I straightened. I looked at the guests, the relatives, the dignitaries. "My grandmother has been poisoning me since I was 8 years old," I said. "She killed my mother with alcohol she provided and encouraged. She has spent 16 years trying to ensure I never reached 25, never claimed my inheritance, never became the woman I am tonight." I held up the lab report. "I have proof. Medical records, chemical analyses, her own journals. I will be submitting them to the authorities. But tonight I wanted you to see. To understand that the woman you honored, the matriarch you respected, is a murderer who uses teacups as weapons." I walked to the cake. I picked up the slice Eugenia had cut for me, the one laced with enough arsenic to finish what 16 years had started. I held it out to her. "Eat, grandmother," I said. "Enjoy, you've earned it." She didn't move, couldn't move. The alkaloids had taken her coordination, her ability to respond. She sat in her chair, trembling, silent, while the room erupted into chaos around her. I set the cake down. I walked out of the house with the ivy-covered walls into the October night, and I breathed air that didn't smell of poison for the first time in 16 years. Eugenia was committed to a psychiatric facility 3 weeks later. Not prison, she was deemed unfit to stand trial, her dementia making her unable to understand the charges. I didn't fight the diagnosis. It was, in its way, more complete than any prison sentence. She was alive, aware enough to know she was trapped, confused enough to never understand why. She would spend her final years in a haze of partial consciousness, occasionally screaming my name, occasionally calling for her mother, usually sitting in silence with her trembling hands folded in her lap. I visited her once. She didn't recognize me. She thought I was a nurse, and she asked me for tea. I didn't give her tea. I gave her water. And I told her quietly that I had inherited the trust, that I had donated 90% of it to foundations protecting children from familial abuse, that I had used the remaining $1 million to open a laboratory. The Helena Lab, I told her, though she didn't understand, for forensic chemical analysis. We detect familial poisoning. We identify the toxins that grandmothers brew in kitchen pots. We save the children who are being told they're sensitive while they're being murdered by inches. She looked at me with blank eyes. She asked for her tea again. I left and I didn't return. The Helena Lab has been operating for 3 years now. We employ chemists, toxicologists, investigators. We work with law enforcement, with child protective services, with families who suspect something wrong but can't prove it. We have identified 17 cases of chronic familial poisoning, arsenic, lead, thallium, the same classics Eugenia used, plus modern variations. We have saved children who were being treated with traditional remedies that were slowly killing them. I keep a sample of Eugenia's special tea in our reference library, not as a trophy, as a teaching tool, a reminder that the most dangerous poisons come in porcelain cups, served with love, by hands that have learned to kill while smiling. I am Helena Vance. I am 38 years old. I was poisoned for 16 years by my grandmother, who wanted my inheritance and my silence. I survived because I learned chemistry, because I learned patience, because I learned that the woman who raises you in a cage can be outlasted by the woman who learns to pick the lock. If you are reading this, and someone is feeding you medicine that makes you weaker, tonics that make you sicker, love that feels like dying, question it. Test it. Trust your body when it tells you something is wrong. Even when the person holding the teapot says everything is right, your body is not delicate. Your mind is not fragile. And the family tradition of poisoning stops with you if you have the courage to pour it out. See you in the next story.